French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that the biggest challenge facing philosophy is the brute fact of existence. Now, whether you count yourself among the religious or not is irrelevant. Your worldview must be able to come to terms with the brute fact of existence, why we exist rather than not exist. In this video, we're going to explore how the very fact of our existence points logically to a creator God, and we're going to try to figure out what we can learn about the purpose and meaning of our existence. Now, elsewhere we've argued on the basis of evidence from cosmology that the universe is not past eternal. It did not exist infinitely into the past. It had a beginning at some point. Now, cosmologists tell us that this beginning was 13.8 billion years ago. Now, the reason that this is important, the reason that it's important that the universe had a beginning, is related to what I will call the causality axiom. Now, this axiom states that everything that begins to exist must have a cause. Now, to see that this is true, we could imagine a universe where this axiom is false. We could imagine a universe where things could begin to exist without a cause, without an underlying mechanism, without any reason whatsoever. So in a universe like this, you could have things popping in and out of existence chaotically without any underlying mechanism. So, for example, it would be impossible to do any real science. There would be no basis for doing any science because we wouldn't be able to account for things chaotically popping into the system without any underlying mechanism. Similarly, why couldn't a planet pop into existence out of nothing and throw off the orbit of Earth? Why couldn't, say, a supermassive black hole pop into existence near our galaxy and swallow us up? Or maybe violation of causality wouldn't have to be catastrophic. One could imagine, say, a large sum of money popping into existence out of nothing under your pillow as you sleep tonight. If only. You see, all of these examples, I think you'll agree, are ridiculous. They're preposterous and nobody would ever take them seriously. In reality, there can't really be any serious objection to this causality axiom. Everything that begins to exist must have a cause. And as we've said, on the basis of evidence from cosmology, the universe began to exist. Therefore, the existence of a universe has a cause. There is a reason the universe exists. And because our existence is so intimately and causally connected to the existence of the universe, we arrive at one of the most important existential deductions. You exist for a reason. There is a cause to your existence. There are no cosmic accidents at play here. Once you did not exist, and now you do. And the bridge between non-existence and existence is the deliberate will of another. So I've argued then that because we began to exist, we must have a cause. And I'm arguing that that cause is God himself. Now, I can almost hear your objection. Then who created God? And if that is your objection, you've misunderstood the causality axiom. So to be clear, what the axiom says is everything that begins to exist must have a cause. And that phrase begins there is the essential phrase. Because God is past eternal, he didn't begin to exist. And therefore there is no logical need for a causal explanation for God. Only things that begin to exist necessarily require a causal explanation. This is precisely why, in philosophical terms, we refer to God as the first cause. So, we began to exist, and therefore we have a cause, and that cause was Creator God. We began in the imagination of God, and then by a deliberate act of his will, he created all that was created, including us. But the question we then want to address is, why? Why did he create us? What is the purpose and meaning to our existence? Why do we exist in the first place? Now, the biblical and Christian answer to this is, of course, complex and multifaceted. But let me just peel off a couple of ideas that show up in the biblical text of Genesis, which is the book of origins. Now, almost immediately in this text, we discover what our primary purpose is. And in fact, what we discover is our primary purpose is to be in the presence of God. God put mankind in a garden and then walked with him in the cool of the day. We were supposed to be in the presence of God, in the loving connection to our Creator God. This was always meant to be our primary purpose. Now, one way you can kind of understand, I guess, that rationale is maybe by analogy with our own desire to have children. We know that when we're in loving, intimate relationships, there is a natural inclination to extend that love to nurture another. And it is the very same with our Creator God. And in fact, the biblical text of Genesis conjures up exactly this connotation of a loving couple desiring to have children. What it specifically says in the text is, God says, "Let us make man in our image." In other words, in this environment of love, let us raise children. Let us raise beings in our image. It is this loving connection to God that is our primary reason for existing. Now, you might object, and it's a good question, why didn't God make it more obvious? If this is our primary purpose, why isn't it more obvious to us? In fact, why is it more that we feel sometimes we live in a very fractured world, or maybe even sometimes a hateful world? Well, the answer to this question also comes from the Genesis text. We see that actually this disconnect that we feel is a violation of that primary purpose. And this is played out for us in the well-known narrative of Adam and Eve, who were placed in this garden. And we know the story. We know that they eat from the only tree that they were forbidden to eat from in the garden. You see, just like in the parent-child relationship, there's a hierarchy in the creator-creature relationship. And that hierarchy is represented by our obedience to the Creator, just as the child submits to the parent. Now, the requirement for obedience by no means contradicts the existence of love in the relationship. In fact, we know that love requires free will. And so that choice between obedience and disobedience is actually essential. But since humanity ultimately rejected God in that moment of choice, all of reality in some sense became abnormal in that moment because we violated our primary purpose and our primary relationship between man and God. And that violation actually results in actually quite a complex separation. And all of the pain and all of the toil and all of the suffering of humanity finds its rotting root here in the tree of disobedience. And we can identify lots of ways in which that has affected humanity, and lots of ways in which that violation has produced a separation. And it's a complex separation of man from God, man from man, man from himself, and also man from nature. All of reality is contorted and twisted and broken by this severance. And this is precisely what Jesus came to heal, to restore that connection to Creator God for which we were originally made. The totality of sin separation healed by the totality of Jesus' sacrifice. We see also in that biblical text that there was a secondary purpose. We see that we were actually also purposed to reign in some sense. And the narrative goes like this: God places mankind in a gated paradise that we call Eden. And in the confines of that paradise, in the security of that gated paradise, God teaches mankind about himself, about his principles, about his kingdom, and about his nature. And then commissions mankind to then take those principles, take that kingdom, and expand it and replicate it throughout the rest of the earth. Now, a key point is that secondary purpose was always meant to be subordinate to the primary purpose of being in a loving connection. If you take away the connection, all you're left with is a vain ambition and pointless toil. What you get is basically man trying to establish his own kingdom by his own principles. Man becomes his own reference point. You see, in Christian theology, we find coherent, consistent, and nuanced answers to the brute fact of existence, but also to big questions like why we exist, to our meaning and our purpose of our existence, but also to why sometimes we tend to fulfill that sense of purpose with vain ambitions and pointless toil, why sometimes we pursue worthless things to give us a sense of purpose. Let's compare that momentarily with another very popular worldview, that of naturalistic atheism. In that worldview, not only do you not have an answer to the brute fact of existence because there's no first cause in that worldview, but also we have to believe that our intrinsic sense of purpose and our pursuit of meaning are really just tricks of our biology, just a hangover of the survival of the fittest. And what happens is you soon find yourself in the philosophical gutters of nihilism in a universe of cosmic accidents. But you are no cosmic accident. You are loved deeply by a God who imagined you before you existed, and your whole life is filled with his divine purpose and meaning.